Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Weekend Bible Study. It's good to get together in this strange way, but we feel oddly together in doing it. I know we have students from Switzerland to Australia, and that's terrific. And new people are finding us right along, and we're glad to welcome all of you with us as well. All is well here in Tyler. I thought I might mention this is episode number 99 of the Weekend Bible Study. Gary and I are trying to figure out what special treat we want to have next week because we want to celebrate number 100 of the Weekend Bible Study. You can do it with us. Find yourself, depending on your health, of course, you may want to find a bran muffin, a special tea, some gourmet coffee, or something of that nature. So next week we celebrate episode 100 of the Weekend Bible Study. We got some questions this week, so go ahead and get yourself a hot cup of coffee and a cookie, and let's go. Robin Stone writes, I read your essay on the three tithes. Last week, if you remember, I mentioned the essay I have on my form about the second and third tithes, which are up there, so that I won't have to go through those again. I read that essay, and I'm curious about the 7-year period you mentioned in your essay. The third tithes is to be collected in the third year of the 7-year period. How do I know when the 7-year period starts? Does everyone use the same 7-year cycle, or is the cycle specific to each person? Where are we in the 7-year cycle now? We don't know. That's the answer to that. I've heard people say they had the Jubilee all figured out. Normally, you see, you would work this out from the Jubilee. When the Jubilee year, which is the 50th year in a cycle, kind of compares to Pentecost. When the Jubilee rolls around, you start to count on the year after the Jubilee. Year 1, 2, year 3. And I've seen people who think they have that figured out, but I have seen absolutely nothing convincing. It's all speculative, and I think kind of pointless. In Israel, they started counting from the year they entered the land. And yes, they all kept the same year as the sabbatical year or the year of the third tithe, as far as we know. We have no idea where we are in that cycle. I know some in years gone by who started their count from their baptism, but it really seems to be a part of the Israelite economy in the land. I think it has to do with conservation, has to do with keeping the land rich for producing of food. You know, the idea of fallowing your land is a good idea. It makes a difference in the outgoing product of the land. But this would then have been a part of the Israelite economy on the land. One can only observe it in principle today, and you will have to be your own judge of how you might do that. For me, I don't even grow any crops, so I can't very well do anything about that. I can let debts go if I need to, but that's about it. One of the most important things we have to learn from the law is in the matter of making good faith judgments based on the law. The very existence of a law is an invitation to legalism. That's legalism, meaning trying to justify yourself by works of the law and being picky in the things about the law. But there is no way to give people a law that covers every behavior, every aspect of behavior known to man. You can't do it. It is utterly impossible. The books would unbalance the continents and the globe. We have to consider. We have to think. We have to decide. And it's not just the letter of this or that law that controls. It is God's intent of a better life for us that controls. And I think it's also important to understand the law is not about the next life. It's about this life. It's funny how so many people feel that Christianity is all about the next life. It has, they think in terms of, well, God will bless me in the kingdom. God will bless me in heaven. No, that's not what the law is about. It's about this life, right here, right now. It's not about salvation as we use the term. It's about having a long, happy, productive life and doing God's will in the world. This is important. You might want to write this next thing down because it is one of the most important things you'll ever learn about the law. You don't take a law in isolation. You interpret the law in the light of the whole of the law, because there are other aspects in the law that may clarify the one that we're asking about right now. 119th Psalm, if you haven't gotten around to reading it yet, you really need to, get yourself one of these days, an extra cup of coffee, and put your feet up on the footstool and sit there and read it, stop, stare into space, and think about it, because the 119th Psalm does more to explain the purpose of the law, what it's for, and how to use it, than any other chapter in the Bible. Okay? In Psalm 119, 105, the psalmist says this: "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." Notice that? Not shackles and chains, not a yoke around your neck. It's a light, so you don't fall down and hurt yourself. "I have sworn and I will perform it. I will keep your righteous judgments." Now, you got a lot of God's judgments in the Bible. Then in Psalm 119, verse 97, he says, "Oh, how I love your law. It's my meditation all the day." What does he mean by that? Well, he reads the law, and he sits back, and he thinks about it for a while. Why do you need to think about it for? You just do it, don't you? Well, I guess, but the point is, if you don't think about it, you may not understand why it's given and how and exactly how you should do it. Through your commandments, have made me wiser than my enemies. I've always got enemies. I have more understanding than all my teachers, for your testimonies are my meditation. They're what I think about, and they influence the things that I do. It's funny. I think about this from time to time. Back in the years when I was in college, I would often go through the Psalms as a part of my prayer life, and one year I decided I'd go through the Proverbs as well, just tack it on the end. Boy, was that an experience. Because in the process of going through the Proverbs, I found myself called a fool page after page. I got some understanding of how God looks at things from page after page. And to me, there are Proverbs to this day that I didn't, pointedly try to memorize, but they just stuck. When you're a young man, you put your foot in it a lot. You make a lot of mistakes. And there is a proverb. I can't even tell you the chapter and verse. I just tell you what it says. It says, "If you have spoken foolishly in lifting up yourself, lay your hand on your mouth." Oh, how much grief that has saved me. Now, mind you, I had the grief before. I make some kind of a stupid statement, and then having realized I did, I try to justify myself. I try to explain it. What I want to say is, that's not really the kind of person I am. I had to face up to it. Yeah, it is. If it hadn't been the kind of person I am, I wouldn't have done it. And I learned also, this is fascinating, I learned it partly through my own experience and partly through watching other people. When you're dean of students in a college, you get a lot of human examples to look at. I began to realize that when a student had screwed up and came into my office on the carpet, and he started trying to explain, to apologize, the more he said, the deeper he made the groove go of the mistake that he had made, the more profound impression it made upon me. What the proverb is telling us is, if you have spoken foolishly in lifting up yourself, shut up. If you know an apology, make it, but don't make the apology with the vision of saying, "I'm not that kind of person." You make the apology saying, "I was wrong. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't cause any problem." And boy, you got to learn to leave it there. To me, understanding just the principle of when you've made a big mistake, shut up about it, was worth more than I can tell you. This is what meditation, though, is all about. It is about digging those grooves into your brain, about making the impression go deeper in your mind, so that when you face a life situation, the answer pops into your consciousness, unbidden, as it has for me on many occasions, just a whole lot of times. One time I had to pull all the guys out of a dormitory into the hallway and give them a going over because they had engaged in a very foolish prank. And I won't bother going into what it is, but it was expensive, time-consuming, and stupid, as often that is the case. But a proverb came to mind. It said, "It is as sport to a fool to do mischief." Now, you fellas do realize now how you have branded yourselves. You were engaging in mischief, and you thought it was sport. Therefore, you're fools. Well, the psalmist goes on to say, "I understand more than the ancients because I keep your precepts. I have refrained my feet from every evil way that I might keep your word. I have not departed from your judgments because you have taught me. Don't we understand? Teaching is a process. It's not just flipping a switch inside of our brain. And you got to participate in the process. How sweet are your words to my taste, yea, sweeter than honey to my mouth. Through your precepts I get understanding, therefore I hate every false way. To me, this is one of the great illustrations of the importance of the study of the law of God. There are actually three big places you look in the Bible. The law, that is the testimony of God. The prophets, that is the way God has spoken through those men to a people just as stupid as we are. And the words of Jesus. These are the words that guide us in our lives. Now, here's one thing you also need to remember about the law, and it's what I'm driving at in this whole thing. It is this: the whole is more than the sum of its parts. It's a saying you may hear in a lot of different areas. It's basically the principle of synergy, that things work together and you know more. For example, if I know that A equals B, and then I learn that B equals C, well, now I know that A equals C without having to be told. It's a simple idea, but by adding up all the parts and by evaluating the parts and trying to keep them together, you actually come to know things you weren't even told. You know, it does you no good at all to keep one law while you disobey another one. It isn't just that God's going to hold you accountable for it. Life will hold you accountable for it. You have got to take the time to sit down, read the Word, talk to God about the Word, and it will eventually change your life. Alex writes, don't know where either one of these people are from. I wish you all would tell me that when you do write in. He says, first off, I want to let you know that I just recently found the weekend Bible study through iTunes and enjoying it. I have no idea how that worked. I'm just glad it worked. He said, I have an iPhone. I can search for the podcast on the phone and begin streaming whichever episode I'm interested in without the need to wait for a download from anywhere or anytime. It's extremely convenient. You know, I keep hearing that about that. I've got an iPod. I still don't really use it very well. Anyhow, he says, I just started the lessons on Deuteronomy, so forgive me if my question relates to material covered a while back. Oh, don't worry about it. I can handle it. My question stems from your commentary while covering Deuteronomy 3. You commented that Moses' sin of striking the rock the second time around rather than speaking to it does not seem like that big a deal. No, I didn't make myself clear. It was a very big deal. God saw it as an attempt on Moses' part to glorify himself rather than glorifying God and doing what he was told. Alex goes on. You also commented that you felt what was really at play behind God not allowing Moses into the promised land was a changing of the guard from Moses to a younger Joshua. What I was suggesting was that it was time for that change, and that may have been a contributing reason for it. But a lot of the stuff that we're doing here is we are making conjectures or we're reasoning forward, which is perfectly correct to do. We're actually trying to add through and find something that's not stated in the text. We don't know for certain why this was done the way that it was done beyond what's written in the text. But I think it's okay for us to meditate on it, think about it, and to consider what else might be involved. Alex goes on, I'm not sure I agree with that. Crossing the Jordan into the Promised Land was a big deal, and indeed it was. From Scripture we see that Moses himself thought it was a big deal because he pleaded with God to allow him in. You said yourself that the crossing of the Jordan has taken on the symbolism of passing from this life to the next life. It symbolized entering into the kingdom of God, just as many other aspects of Israel's journey from Egypt to Canaan were highly symbolic. Yes, I have said that. But at the time, crossing the Jordan did not have all the symbolism that has accrued to it in years that followed. But it really was a very big deal. I don't think one soul that originally was in that group that crossed the Jordan understood it in terms of leaving this life going into the next life. There's even some conjecture or some question about what they thought about the next life at all. Alex goes on, I think Moses was not allowed into the Promised Land because in striking the rock twice he became a symbol of a Christian who falls away. Now, I'm sorry, Alex, I didn't follow that. He gave us some scriptures about the rock, and the rock was Christ. And all I can say about that is it's an interesting analogy to draw. I can't say I see it in Scripture. But preachers for generation have drawn analogies from Scripture to make this or that point. We need to be really careful not to elevate our analogies to the level of truth. For example, you don't try to say that what Moses did and experienced was intended to be taken this way. What you say is it can be taken this way, and you can sometimes reach through people's minds and hearts and get them to see things and change them in ways you couldn't. Thanks for writing on that, Alex. It's a good question. From Diana Keener, Sylvania, Georgia. She writes about llamas. I brought up the last time as to whether they were clean, whether they could eat or not. She goes to something she looked up on anatomy. She says, llamas are very strong mammals that have two-toed feet with toenails on the top and pads on the bottom. They do not have hooves. Llamas are 3 to 4 feet tall, and the one near my house is. I know his name, by the way. His name is Cosmo. Young llamas are called crias. I probably won't be the first one that writes this. No, don't eat your neighbor's llama. Okay, I will not do that. I did really kind of thought that. And the reason I thought that it probably wasn't was because of the resemblance to a camel in so many ways. They're a little more attractive than camels, but I suppose that depends on whether you're a camel or not. Barb Ellis writes from Pocahontas, Arkansas. On my Facebook page, a person wondered about his job of delivering pizzas during the days of unleavened bread. Another friend said, "Oh, don't worry about it," and used Deuteronomy 14:21. You shall not eat anything that's died naturally. You may give it to the sojourner within your towns, that he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner, for you are a people holy to God. Well, as rare as it is for me to get a question I have not heard before, it is even more rare to get a question and answer I have not heard before. And I got one here. What your friend is doing is making a judgment call. When you live in a non-observant society, you may end up applying the law in ways not addressed in the Bible itself. For example, if we lived in an observant society, we might well not use electricity on the Sabbath day, because somebody's got to work out there somewhere for us to turn our light switch on, or more important than here in Texas in July, the air conditioning on. So we might very well not use it. For example, Nehemiah, you read his story, he was very strict in enforcing what we would call blue laws. But he was the governor, and he could do that. And consequently, he could shut down stores and make them go away, and even people that set up their little shops outside the city walls, he told them to get out of there or they'd lay hands on them. So, in other words, he had the authority. In his world, there wouldn't be a pizza place open during the days of unleavened bread unless they were selling unleavened pizza. I do believe that exists. If you got a recipe, I'd love to have it. I don't care to make a ruling on this subject, but I do understand the principle that he is raising. And I think you have to decide, think about it, and say, this is what I think is the right thing to do. And boy, when you get there, that's what you ought to do. Barbara writes, indication seems to be that even though a thing may be unholy to be used by you, it's okay to sell it to others. I have a problem with selling leavened bread to others who don't practice the holy days, but I'm afraid I would have a problem selling an animal that died of itself, even if they knew how it died for health reasons. We raise cattle, and if any of them died, even of natural causes, and wasn't bled out, the whole animal was discarded. We wouldn't sell it if someone considered eating it. Your thoughts on selling unleavened bread during the days of unleavened bread, holy days, and selling animals not bled out to foreigners. Well, as I've said, and I'm saying a lot today, and I probably will more through Deuteronomy, it's a judgment call to sell roadkill to foreigners. Nor would I work at a pizza delivery during the season, but I would not excommunicate a brother who did. Judgment calls? Well, we have to decide them. We got some more of them here when Keir Graham writes to us from Zurich in Switzerland. Now, I knew Keir was there listening to us, although I hadn't heard from him for a while. He's the one guy who is really grateful that this is not a live streaming study, because it would have him up in the middle of the night if that's when he had to be there. Okay, he has some questions following the program number 98, which would be last week. Regarding seething a young goat in milk, I've always been taught that means that one may not eat an animal that has not yet been weaned. Is that correct? Answer, I don't know. I have heard that explanation, but I have to conclude it or consider it as a judgment call. In what way is it a judgment call? Well, what is the meaning? What's the purpose behind the law? What in the world might God have in mind when he said you shall not seethe a kid in its mother's milk? The immediate image that comes to mind is you put the mother's milk on the stove and you put the meat from the kid in the milk and you cook it up and eat it. Again, I don't know what that dish was or what the recipe was. What can I learn from this law? Frankly, it's kind of hard to see a practical application unless there's something in the development of the animal we wouldn't otherwise know, have to do with her nutrition and so forth, but that's not explained anywhere, which plumps us right back in the same place we were before. We make a judgment call. On the other hand, if it was known to Moses' audience that it was a pagan fertility custom or a superstition, then the meaning is to keep ourselves apart from pagan customs. This can also be applied to the practice of drinking blood. But judgment call simply means the actual application of the law isn't clear. What I now have to do is I have to ask myself, what is the meaning behind the law? What is the purpose in the law? And how might I apply the law in a meaningful way? Because too many of these old laws back here cannot be applied in a meaningful way in our society, and need not be because we do not live in an observant society. Keir goes on. You mentioned avoiding meat and animals dedicated to other gods. Does this mean not eating halal meat? I noticed when visiting one inner London school in Islington, it bought only halal beef for its school lunches without providing alternative beef. He said, I became a vegetarian that day. But I hadn't heard that before. I did not know it, so I looked it up. Halal is Arabic and is similar to the idea of kosher for Jews. In other words, it has to be killed according to law. It's another judgment call. I'd say chances are halal food is perfectly healthy and harmless, and beyond that, it may have to do with who you think Allah is. But again, Paul is ambivalent about this. One case says that you don't do it, another case he says it doesn't matter if you do. So we have the right to sit down, think it through, pray about the matter, make a decision, and act on it. Then he goes on to another thing. Regarding insects that swarm, I've experienced a few locust swarms, which are an amazing sight, but thankfully I didn't feel peckish at the time. Peckish, for all you Americans, is British for being hungry, like pecking on something. So anyway, he didn't comment about it. I don't know where he saw those. I'm kind of curious. Peter's vision of the clean and unclean animals and the instruction for him to kill and eat, which Peter refused because it was contrary to the law. Any thoughts on why Abraham did not reject God's instruction to sacrifice Isaac, especially considering what some pagan religions instructed for their firstborn? It's hard to say. Abraham did not have the degree of applied law that Moses had. He had the Ten Commandments, of that I am quite certain, and it's fairly evident to me that he had other laws as well. Beyond that, I would be speculating. But he was told to do it, and we're also told, though, that he went to do it believing that God could raise him from the dead. In other words, he felt the outcome would be that his son would be alive. And so with complete faith in God, he went ahead. And he apparently really recognized the source. Peter questioned it, which I think one of the reasons it's important that we know that is because Peter, having been with Christ for 3.5 years and having heard everything he had to say about clean and unclean meats, still thought it was wrong to eat those animals, snakes, cockroaches, whatever else was in there. Keir goes on, how far should one interpret the brother Israelite consideration when in deciding whether or not to charge someone interest on a loan? Nowadays, is one's brother Israelite only someone in the church? But that begs the question, which church? Which churches? Yes, it does. It's another judgment call. I think I can charge anyone interest on a loan if he is using the loan to make money. I don't care whether he's a brother in the church or out of the church. I'm interested in one thing only: if I'm going to lend him money for his business, that is, to make money with his business, I'll lend it to anybody. And I can charge him interest on it because, I have a right to it. It's the time value of money is involved in it. I would not charge anyone, brother or not, interest on a loan given for medical treatment for a child. Would you? You have to loan money to them to help them out with their kid. It's a loan. They should pay it back. no interest in that kind of situation. And not only that, if they don't pay it back, you write it off. This is all very much, in the theme of the law of God. It's right there. If you read it all, if you read the whole thing, if you take the whole thing into consideration, you can make a decision based on that. God was giving them instructions for their time and their place, but you can't dismiss the law because of that. What you can do is you can arrive at judgments based upon the law because of the purpose, the intent, and so forth. There are other questions in general, he says, for another time if you wish. Perseverance. You mentioned that when you get to the end of your rope, you put a knot in it and hang on. Quite. When do you know that something should be repeatedly attempted before deciding that the door is closed or the way blocked? A dear friend in Oregon suggested praying before each attempt, asking for guidance and success. If it doesn't happen after 3 attempts, then it's possibly not God's will, and you should move on and try something else. What are your thoughts? It's strictly a judgment call. You may get tired of hearing that before Deuteronomy is finished on this type of thing. I think that saying 3 times and don't ask anymore, I wrote something on that some time ago, just simply because Paul said he besought the Lord 3 times, and at the end of that, he knew where he was. I think you keep praying for something until your will and God's will begin to coincide, but you can take it as long as you want to. I don't think God's going to get upset with you over it, but nevertheless, there does come a place where I think the answer does lie. There comes a place where you have to make a decision. And you need to be sure that you're not using consulting God as an excuse for not deciding. Boy, that was a lesson I learned the hard way when I was down in Austin with the challenge of resigning from the Worldwide Church of God or not resigning. And I just kept asking God to show me what to do, show me what to do. I wanted him actually to do it for me. I hoped they'd fire me so I could be free. And then one day I realized he had shown me everything he was going to show me. What he wanted from me was a decision. I'm sure you've heard me say this before, but it applies in this kind of situation. You keep praying, and there may come a point in time where you're going to realize that God wants you to make the decision, and he will make it work however you go. Going on now with his questions. He was really loaded up this time. Cancer. Do you think cancer has always existed in the world from its start, or is this a fairly recent disease? More and more people nowadays seem to have it, and that includes people in the church who have always followed God's food laws and are most excellent people. Canker is mentioned in the Bible, but that seems to be related to a cankerworm, which becomes a moth and destroys things like rust. Well, I don't think cancer was recognized as such in biblical days, but I think it's been around for a very long time, probably showing up not long after the flood. Cancer is a degenerative disease and simply involves a breakdown in bodily systems where cells start growing and they won't stop growing and they become a problem. I can't believe it took very long for that to show up. When was cancer first recognized as a distinct disease? Well, according to Wikipedia, the Greek term carcinoma is the medical term for a malignant tumor derived from epithelial cells. It is Celsus who translated carcinos in the Latin cancer, also meaning crab. Galen used onkos to describe all tumors, the root for the modern word oncology. Hippocrates describes several kinds of cancers. They go on. I'll leave it up to you to consult Wikipedia. But what's interesting is the oldest known description of and surgical treatment for cancer was discovered in Egypt and dates back to approximately 1600 B.C. The papyrus describes 8 cases of ulcers of the breast that were treated by cauterization with a tool called the fire drill, and I don't even want to know what that was. The writing says about the disease, there is no treatment. Okay, that's the questions for today. Grab yourself or warm up your coffee and get yourself another cookie, and let's take a look at Deuteronomy 16 and see how far we can get. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover unto the Lord your God. For in the month of Abib the Lord your God brought you forth out of Egypt by night. You shall therefore sacrifice the Passover unto the Lord your God, of the flock and the herd, in the place where the Lord shall choose to place his name there. Now it should be easy enough to understand that by this time the Passover could no longer be killed just anywhere. The lamb had to be killed in the place where God had chosen to place his name. Now, that's an interesting expression, the placing of his name. What do you think that means? This might be a good place to stop the playback and talk it over. Basically, it is the place God has chosen, and it is by his authority that they were to go there. And generally speaking, when it's in the name of or by the name of, it's talking about by his authority. Now, that ended when the temple was destroyed, but it's easy to understand the impulse to reestablish the temple among Jewish people, isn't it? Verse 3, you shall eat no leavened bread with the Passover, which is why we take the Christian Passover with unleavened bread, even though the days of unleavened bread have not officially begun. Some amateur theologians have found the Greek word artos in Strong's Concordance, and they see it can mean loaf, and they conclude that we can take the Passover with leavened bread. You know, sometimes I wonder if people do some things just because they want to be different from everybody else. For there is plainly no mandate to use leavened bread for this, although there is for Pentecost, that mandate. And since there's no mandate you have to do it, and it's okay to eat unleavened bread, why in the world change the custom? Well, to be different, I guess. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread therewith, even the bread of affliction. For you came forth out of the land of Egypt in haste, that you may remember the day when you came forth out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life. That this is the meaning for Israelites is inescapable. For those who are not Israelites, the meaning may shift. The practice doesn't. It's Paul, for example, who uses leaven as a type of sin, writing to the Corinthians who are Gentiles, that they should, well, anyway, he says not that leaven is sin, but it typifies sin in connection to the Passover. Just read 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and you'll have that in hand. Verse 4, there shall be no leavened bread seen with you in all your coast 7 days. Neither shall there be anything of the flesh you sacrifice the first day, and even remain all night until the morning, just like before. Now, living in a non-observant society, we cannot apply that. If you go out to eat during the days of unleavened bread, leaven will be seen with you. It'll be on the table next to you where somebody else is eating, or it may even be on your table as the waiter comes by and slams down a basket full of rolls that you don't want there. Many people ask the waiter to take that bread away. They don't want it to be seen at their table. And in my case, I want them to take the bread away because I'm absent-minded, and there's a fair to middling chance I might forget myself and eat some of it. The important thing is not to eat leavened bread during these days. Verse 5, you may not sacrifice the Passover with any of your gates which the Lord your God gives you. In other words, you can't do it in Galilee. Here is where the significance of Jeroboam's break with Judah comes into place. And that is thoroughly discussed in the biblical history items about 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, so I'll refer you back to that to do your study on Jeroboam. You'll do it at the place which the Lord your God shall choose to place his name in. There you shall sacrifice the Passover at even at the going down of the sun at the season you came forth out of Egypt. Now, I should call your attention to something here. In the Hebrew, the word down isn't really there. The idea of sundown, our definition of sundown is when the thing disappears over the horizon. That isn't necessarily what the Hebrew says. It's just at the going of the sun. When is the sun gone? Well, the Jews have rules that they have established for that. I guess so, just so people know where they're at. To be able to see 3 stars in the sky, that means the sun is now gone. Some people think if you're going to still read newsprint outside, the sun isn't gone. In other words, it reflects off of clouds and so forth. I don't think God's that picky. I do think he expects you to make your own judgment in good faith about this. Now, consider the Day of Atonement. This is explain what I mean by good faith. You can always move sunset forward, or rather move it back at the beginning of the days of unleavened bread, and move it forward at the end of the days of unleavened bread, and thereby shorten your fast. That's not doing things in good faith. If you can make your own rule if you wish to, because the Bible does not specify. If your church, your organization, or in case of Nehemiah, if your society has a definition, that's what you live with. Okay. You shall roast and eat it in the place which the Lord your God shall choose. You shall turn in the morning and go to your tents. 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the 7th day shall be a solemn assembly to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work on that day. By the way, we've got an idiom here that I should mention. You do it 6 days, and on the 7th day you do this. Doesn't mean you only eat unleavened bread 7 days. It just is a way of 6s and 7s of getting you up to the total amount. Now come the instructions for the Feast of Weeks, that is, for Pentecost. 7 weeks shall you number to you. Begin to number the 7 weeks from such time as you begin to put the sickle to the corn. You shall keep the Feast of Weeks unto the Lord your God with a tribute of a freewill offering of your hand, which you give it as the Lord has blessed you. Free will means whatever you think is appropriate. Now the judgment of the Jewish leadership has been that the day you begin the count down toward Pentecost is on the day after the Sabbath that begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That is the 15th day of Nisan. But neither here nor in Leviticus 23 is this tied to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and yet that's where it's at. It's not there. The controlling factor in the law is, when is the grain ripe, which in the normal course of events will be right there at the days of unleavened bread, but the unleavened bread is not mentioned in the count. It is the judgment of Christians that one begins the count on the day when Jesus, as the first of the first fruits, ascended to the Father after his resurrection. Why fight it? And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, the Levite within your gates, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, everybody, in the place which the Lord your God has chosen to put his name there. Jeroboam broke with that tradition, and the result was dire. I again refer you to the history radio program, Biblical History, on that issue. You shall remember you were a bondman in Egypt. You shall observe and do these statutes. It's appropriate for us to remember that we were in bondage to sin, and it was the Christian Passover that freed us. The analogy is perfect. You shall observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days, after you have gathered in your corn and your wine pressings. And you shall rejoice in the feast, you, your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, everybody. I want you to take notice of something here. If you mark your Bible, you might want to mark this one. This is not limited to Jews. Have you ever heard that? Oh, well, those festivals were just for the Jews. Nope, they were for everyone. 7 days shall you keep a solemn feast to the Lord your God in the place which you shall choose, because the Lord will bless you in all your increase. In the works of your hands you shall rejoice. Verse 16, 3 times in a year shall all your males appear before the Lord your God in the place he shall choose. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God which he had given you. Now the criterion for deciding what your offering should be, there are 3 holy day offerings specified through the year. Not that you can't take more offerings than that, you can, but these are the ones that are required. Okay, how in the world can a person give according to the blessing God's given you? I mean, there's just no way that you can give back to God. So he says, every man shall give as he is able. So you got 2 things you have to take into account. One is how much you have, and the next one is the blessing that God has given you. And who gets to decide? You do. Then comes this rather interesting thing. I may want to come back next week and talk about this some more. But judges and officers shall you make in all your gates which the Lord your God gives you throughout all your tribes, and they shall judge the people with just judgment. Here is the establishment of a judiciary which you can't order civil society without it. You just can't, because you can't have that many books of the law for people to observe, and somebody's got to make decisions and somebody's got to carry them out. You shall not wrest judgment. You shall not respect persons. You shall not take a bribe. For a gift blinds the eyes of the wisest man and perverts the words of the righteous. I think if you look around modern politicians, you can see examples of it all over the place. That which is altogether just shall you follow. Why? For God's sake? No, for yours, that you may live and inherit the land. Verse 21, do not set up any wooden Asherah pole beside the altar you build to the Lord your God. Do not erect a sacred stone, for these the Lord hates. You know, you would think people would know better than that. But by the time they got down to King Josiah, they had actually moved the Asherah poles right into the Temple Mount. And male temple prostitutes as well. How far did they go? Well, you want to read the history again of Josiah and the reforms, and you will see how deeply into this corruption Israel had gone. Okay, that takes care of it for this week. Episode number 99 is behind us. Next week, we'll do episode number 100 and celebrate. God bless, have a wonderful Sabbath, and write to me, Ron, at borntowin.net.